Hi, everyone. I hope we're all doing really well today. So today we're going to be talking about the moral permissibility and moral impermissibility of war. Thomas Aquinas is a philosopher from the 13th century. Super interesting, just writes on just about anything that you could imagine. And so it would kind of make sense that he writes on just war theory. And so Aquinas is going to give us three necessary conditions for when war is morally justifiable. But then we're also going to look at three modern day conditions that Aquinas does not consider. So our big question is, given how awful and horrendous war actually is, right? People losing limbs, families being broken, right? All of these horrible consequences of war, is it ever the case that war is morally permissible, right? So this is a relevant question. It also is a relevant question for our thinking about policy today, right? Okay, so Aquinas in the Summa Theologica, which is sort of his magnum opus, right? Um, he argues that war is sometimes righteous, right, and not always sinful. And so when he uses these terms, we're thinking as of sinful as morally wrong and righteous as morally permissible or morally upright in some way, right? So when he's asking if war is sinful, he's basically just asking if it's wrong. Okay, so he lays out three conditions. The first one here is the authority condition. So according to this condition, the declaration of war must come from a sovereign and not from some private citizen. So um, so what does this mean? This means that the somebody in the government or somebody in a state of power has to be the one that declares the war, right? So this precludes the idea of a private citizen going out and hiring an army, right, to fight for them, and then declare a war on some other entity, right? So private citizens cannot justifiably declare war. Now, Aquinas has a very specific sort of conception of authority. So he's thinking of kings, right? And so, for instance, the king's authority is granted very clearly by God, according to Aquinas. And so ultimately, the authority to declare war falls on God. And so in our own society, we may wonder whether or not we meet the authority condition, given that we like the authority comes from the people, right? Rather than from like a genetic line that traces back to, or a genetic line that establishes rule from God, right? So the authority condition may look a little bit different, so we may need to modify the authority condition just to make sense with today's world. But I think the biggest takeaway from the authority condition is that private citizens cannot declare war. Okay, so this is also a really interesting take. So, for instance, the American Revolution, there is no nation that's established at the time, right? There is no sort of authority, right? And so it seems like the authority condition would preclude various rebellions or various revolutions or civil wars as well, right? And so if we want to say that sometimes a revolution can be morally justifiable, or say that sometimes a civil war can be morally justifiable, then we have to say that whatever entity is rebelling has an authority on its own right, or we have to reject this condition, right? So this condition seems to preclude in a very serious way the possibility of rebellion or civil war. Maybe that's okay, right? But if you're interested in this, right, or you think that revolutions are sometimes justifiable, we need to figure out where the authority comes from for the rebellion, the rebelling party. Okay. Next, uh, two is about just cause, or what we might call the fault condition. So the idea is that the group that is being attacked, right, that is having war declared against them, must be at fault in some way, right? So somebody's got to be doing something bad, right? Um, so for instance, if a nation invades another nation and takes resources from that nation, then the first nation who's doing the invading, they're doing something morally wrong, and so the other nation has the right to defend themselves, right? So the idea here is that there's clearly a self-defense right, or maybe if one nation were to come to the aid of another nation to help self-defend, right? So somebody's got to be at fault. There has to be some sort of wronging that's occurring, right? Um, okay, next we have the right intention condition. So for instance, if if we're going to declare war, our intention must be one of two things, according to Aquinas: to bring about some outweighing good, right, or some kind of overriding good, and two, to prevent some worse evil from occurring, right? So we have to have our sort of hearts in the right place. We can't say that we're going to go to another nation's aid to help defend that nation when ultimately our motive is we're going to take the resources from that nation instead of that other guy, right? So we can't have a motive for profit. We can't have a motive for obtaining natural resources or any sort of gain. Rather, our motive must be aimed at some good or preventing some evil. So intentions, according to this condition, can taint the justifiability of war. So even though we say we may have, say, a just cause and a war that comes from a legitimate authority, it may be that our intention is not quite right. And if our intention is not quite right, then the war is unjustifiable. Okay, so these are the three conditions that Aquinas lays out for us in the reading, right? But modern day just war theorists have sort of entertained extra cases and have come up with even more conditions for when there's a just war occurring. So let's look at those three other conditions. So consider the following case. Let's suppose that we're in a situation where we have two nations and one of them is at fault and one of them declares war on the basis of a legitimate authority and intends to bring about some good. Okay, so let's suppose that even though all of these conditions have been met, let's suppose that there's a guarantee or a strong likelihood that all the combatants on one side will die with no chance of success. Is this still an instance of just war? Um, so let's say that a small nation is getting picked on by a big nation. And so the small nation declares war on the basis of authority, has a good intention, and there's a fault that's being done. But it's just guaranteed that all of the combatants from the smaller nation are going to die, right? This is just like a suicide mission. So does that change the justifiability of the war at all, right? And so so if we think yes, right, then we may buy the fourth condition here, which is the probability of success condition. So the idea here is that there has to be some reasonable chance of success, either winning the war or contributing to winning the war, right? It can't be the case that everybody's just going to die, right? That's just basically guaranteed. That taints the justifiability of war according to the probability of success condition. Next, we have what we might call the last resort condition. So let's imagine that we have our smaller nation, right, and our larger nation, and our larger nation is kind of picking on the smaller one, you know, and let's suppose that nation nation B, or the smaller nation, has two alternatives, right? Namely, they can enter into a kind of strong negotiation with the larger nation, right? And that has some viable good outcome, right? There's some, we might be able to get the big nation to stop picking on us. The smaller nation might be able to get the bigger nation to stop picking on them, right? In these negotiations, or they can declare war, right? So we have two options instead of just the one option. So given that we have that option, right, we have a peaceful alternative, do we have to take that peaceful alternative over the war alternative? According to the last resort condition, the answer is yes. So war has to be waged only if there's no other alternative, right? So war is only justifiable if war is your only option. If you have some option other than war, right, some kind of viable option that brings about, say, the good outcome that you intend, well, then you have to go with that other option over the war option. We might be skeptical of this condition, say, right? For instance, it may be that, like, say that the probability of negotiation working is like 10%, right? Whereas if we go to war, we're pretty much guaranteed to bring about the good that we intend, right? So given that we do have this other alternative that's actually the probability is really low, we may wonder, like, do we have to go with that, even though the success of the chances of success are pretty low? So that's like a relevant question we can pose on this condition. We can also justify this condition based on Aquinas's principle of proportional good. So the idea here is that is about killing in self-defense. So Aquinas thinks that you can morally permissibly kill someone in self-defense. But he says that if you have some other alternative than killing the person, right, than killing your assailant, then you have to take that other alternative. If you don't take that other alternative, the killing of that person is sinful or is morally wrong, right? So for instance, if I'm being attacked, I can either say run away and escape, right? I have a good chance of getting away, or I can fight and kill the person that's attacking me. I should go with running away over killing my assailant, given that I have that option. So basically, the last resort condition is just like a reinterpretation, or basically the principle of proportional good applied to war, right? Okay, so let's look at yet another case. So let's suppose that we have two nations, and let's suppose that we have, again, a larger and a smaller nation. And in this case, let's suppose that the smaller nation is like engaged in genocide and some really horrible practices. And the larger nation has the option to go and end those genocides, right? Okay. So it seems like we have a just cause. It seems like we have authority in the right place. We're intending that we prevent some evil. We can suppose that maybe this is our only option, and that we have a really high chance of success, right? So we're meeting all these conditions. But let's suppose that, like, the way in which we're going to end the genocide is by, like, blowing up major cities in the smaller nation with nuclear bombs, right? So and let's suppose that the smaller nation has no nuclear weapons. Actually, they kind of have not a super sophisticated military, right? And so they don't have the resources that the larger nation has, right? So given that we've met all the other conditions, can the larger nation just, like, start just dropping bombs, right? Just dropping bombs on the smaller nation? The proportionality condition says no, right? So the idea here is that the two nations that are at war with each other have to have some sort of even playing field, right? Or they have to have roughly comparable military power. So I like to play this game called Sid Mariner's Civilization Revolutions, right? And the idea here is that all of the players in the game are a nation, and it starts in like 5000 BCE, and then we're like constantly learning all of these new technologies and stuff, right? And so everybody's progressing at their own rate. And one of the things that you do is you build up an army, but as you get new technology, you get more advanced military technology and more advanced troops and stuff. So sometimes like people will still have like spears and bow and arrows and stuff, and then you have like people that have like automatic machine guns, right? And so like the nations that have like the automatic machine guns are just like mowing down all of these like nations that have like pikes and spears and stuff, right? So according to this, that would be an unjustifiable war because it would be so disproportional, right? The fully automatic machine gun versus like somebody with like a spear or a pike. That's just not proportional. That doesn't put these two combatants on an even playing field, right? So in a similar way that just dropping nuclear warheads on a nation that doesn't have any nuclear warheads would be morally impermissible, right? Because it's disproportional. So too, like we have to have military technology that's like roughly comparable to one another. So anyway, so in this lecture, we've talked about when war might be morally permissible. And we've looked at the three conditions that Aquinas gives us: the authority condition, the just cause or fault condition, and the condition that I'm not recalling at the moment. The right intention condition. And then we also looked at three other conditions as well. So anyway, thank you for listening to this lecture.